This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good evening, Rabbi Glatstein. We're continuing in Maseches Nedarim, Daf Chav Gimel Amud Beis. We begin with the Mishnah on Chaf Gimel Amud Aleph. Says the Holy Mishnah, Rabbi ben Yaakov Omer. Rabbi ben Yaakov says, Af haroitza lahader es chavero sheyochel atzlai. Also, someone who wants to make an neder against his friend that he should eat by him, Yoimer lo, he should say, Kol neder shani asa lidar, any neder that I'm destined to make, hu batal, is batal. So as a, so to speak, a preamble to the neder, you say, the nedarim I'm about to say are batal. This way, whatever neder you make will be batal. And when you make the neder, you have in mind that it should not be chal, like you said in your sort of moida, meaning you made this statement, any neder that I'm going to make is null and void, and then you make a neder, it's empty, it doesn't really mean anything. So you should say to him, Kol neder shani asa lidar hu batal, any neder that I'm destined to make is batal. Uvavad sheyizacher b'shas neder. This will be effective as long as you remember the t'nai at the time of the neder. As long as when you make the neder, you're thinking, okay, I don't really mean to make this because of the statement that I just said, that all my nedarim are not chal, as long as you remember that, so the neder will not be chal. So the Gemara has a question. The Gemara's question is, let's see the last ran on the Mishnah. Piska afaroitza lahaders chaveroi. What does that mean? Sha'oiser kol nechasav al chaveroi. You really want your friend to eat by you. So you say you aser all the possessions of your friend if he doesn't eat with you. So what do? Yoimer kol neder shani asa lidar mafarish b'Gemara. The Gemara will explain what this means. But the first question of the Gemara is, wait a second. If you make this declaration that all the nedarim that I say are meaningless, and then you go over to your friend and you say, hey, pal, if you don't eat by me, I aser all my possessions on you, the guy's not going to eat by you because he knows that the neder has no validity because you just announced it. So how is this going to be a way to convince him to eat by you when he knows that your neder has no standing? Says the Gemara, V'kivan de Amar, since he said, Kol neder shani asa lidar, any neder that I'm destined to be menader, yehi bato, should be bato, loy shamalei, he's not going to listen to you, v'loy asi bahadei, he's not going to come to you. Now, the Gemara could simply answer, well, it's talking about where you mutter that under your breath and he didn't hear it. But as the Ran will explain, there will still be two problems, that it won't help to say that you made this declaration quietly and he didn't hear, because they'll still have two problems. What are they? Says the Ran. The Ran says, Kivan de Amar kol neder v'chulu loy shamalei v'loy asi legabei lemecha bahadei. Says the Ran, lefisha kvar yoidea hamezuman, because the person who is invited knows shei neder chalalav, that the neder is not chal shekvar, but loy hamazamin, the one who invited him, was mavatal it. So the Ran says, well, let the Gemara say that he doesn't know. Uvedinhu, really the Gemara could have answered simply, the Amar Madir, where the one who made the neder said, b'chashai, quietly, kedei shelo yishama hamudar, so that the one who the neder was against doesn't hear. But the Ran says, it doesn't help to give that simple answer. Why not? The Mishnah would still not come out good. Why? Since it says, Af haroitza, even someone who wants, mashma, that implies, Dahanami mishum nidre zeruzin mutter. It's mashma, first of all, the reason why this neder is nachal is because this is nidre zeruzin. We had in an earlier Mishnah, by the buyer and the seller, that the nedarim are nachal because the seller just wants to get a higher price than 2 and the buyer just wants to get a lower price than 4. And now this Mishnah begins af. Af implies this is also nidre zeruzin. So the question is, even if you're going to say what the Mishnah means is that you don't say the stipulation out loud, it's still not good, because the word af implies that the reason why it's not chal is because it's nidrei zeruzin. But this is not nidrei zeruzin. The reason why it's not chal is because you made the stipulation. V'lav mishum t'nai shehisnavim kein mai af. What would the af be? Even if you somehow explain this t'nai, but this t'nai is not nidrei zeruzin. V'oid, furthermore, di'i b'chi hai gavna askinan. If we're talking about such a case, heichi tani, how could it teach uvavad shei zachar? As long as you remember. How could the Mishnah say, well, this stipulation will only work as long as you remember it when you made the neder? What do you mean as long as you remember it? You're saying it right before you made the neder, and that's why you're making the neder, because you know that it's not chal because of the stipulation. So what's it saying? As long as you remember it? That's like a guy saying, everyone remember to say, a guy who announces at Ritzei, remember to say Yalav Yavai. You know, he's in the middle of Ritzei, and after he says Ritzei Hashem Lin Mam Chiso Sosam Hashem Savay Lever Besavi Shei Sosam Asamav Skab Ratzin Siratzin Taman Avei Yisrael Amecha Yalav Yavai. Do we have to say, make sure he remembers Yalav Yavai? He just announced it, so of course he's going to remember. Pshita Shu Zacher Sharei B'Shas HaNeder Hu Masna. He's stipulating at the time he makes the neder. So even though the Gemara could answer that the one who the neder was against didn't hear, it's not going to answer some other questions. So says the Gemara, the Mishnah is missing words, and this is what it means to say. If you want your friend to eat by you, and he's refusing, and you make a neder, nidrei zeruzin. It's nidrei zeruzin, and it's not chal. Let's say if I say, Janos, where do you live? Janos.
I'm in Beit Shemesh.
Beit Shemesh. Okay. Let's say, welcome to the share. Let's say I say, I want you to eat at my house. If you don't eat at my house, I'm going to answer all my leftover shalach manas to you. Why would I want to do, right? I'm just trying to pressure you to come to my house. So the halacha is, the neder is not chal at all. I don't need to make any stipulations that any nedarim that I make are not chal. It is fundamentally not chal, because clearly I'm only making it to pressure you. But if you still don't want to come, I'm not going to answer you. Now this presents a question on what we learned on Sunday. Sorry, Sunday I gave the share at a very inconvenient time. Probably you were going to Mincha at the time or something like that, but it was my only opportunity. You know, we learned on Chav Gimel Amud Aleph that if somebody wants their wife to marry off their daughter to a certain person, then and they make a neder that if you don't marry her off to my relative, you're Asr and Hana. The Gemara discusses whether you could use as a Pesach. Well, if you would have known that she wouldn't have listened to you, could you wouldn't have made it. But the neder is chal. Or let's say somebody made his wife take a neder, she's not going to go to the Shiur during the Aliyah Regal. So there, maybe you could use a Pesach, but the Gemara says that is not nidrei zeruzin. And the Ran on Amud Aleph asked, well, why here then? Why, if I'm pressuring you to eat at my house, do we say that neder is not chal? Not only do you not need a Pesach, you didn't even mean it. You didn't mean it. So then why earlier, when you were answering your wife, if she doesn't marry off your daughter to who you want, why there do we say you did mean it, but you could use a Pesach? The Ran said on Amud Aleph a very important distinction. We didn't explain it well enough on Amud Aleph. I want to explain it better now. That on Amud Aleph, when you made her take the neder, when you took the neder against her, you meant it. You meant if she doesn't marry your daughter off to your relative, she's going to be Asr and Hana. But we see here, the guy also meant, if you don't eat by me, you're going to be Asr Bahana. So why here, where you meant it, is it Nidei Zeruzin and it's not Chal, and by your wife, it's Chal, just you could use a Pesach. And basically the distinction is that if I just want you to eat in my house, it's very extreme to say, if you don't eat in my house, you're Asr Bahana. So even though I meant I want you to eat in my house, but the severe consequence makes it that fundamentally, if you don't eat in my house, the neder's not chal, because that's a bit extreme to have a full-fledged intent just to force someone to eat in your house. But in the other situation where you really wanted your wife to marry off this girl to your relative, or you really didn't want her to go to the shiur, then you meant what you said in the neder's chal. So not every nidrei zerazin do we say it's not chal. It has to be, you see, in the case by the buyer and the seller, it's obvious that's nidrei zerazin, because they didn't mean 4, they didn't mean 2. They just meant I want more than 2 or I want less than 4. But there are cases of nidrei zerazin where you mean it, but it's still not chal, and that's when the consequences that you give are, so to speak, out of whack. They're not reasonable for the situation, okay? So now that we said the first part of the Mishnah is, if you want to pressure your friend to eat by you, you could make this stipulation. What's the second part of the Mishnah? The second part of the Mishnah is V'haroitza shelo yiskaimu nedarav. If you want your nedarim not to stand, kol hashana yamoid b'Rosh Hashanah. You should get up on Rosh Hashanah. Now the truth is, you could do it any time of the year, but this way you're making sure that all the nedarim you make throughout the year will not be chal. V'yarman, you say kol neder shani asa lidar. Any neder that I'm destined to make, yehi batal, will be batal. So it's 2 separate cases. Case 1 is, if you want to pressure someone to eat by you, you could make a neder and it's not chal because it's nidrei zerazin. And number 2, if you don't want your nedarim to stand, you should get up on Rosh Hashanah and say, any neder that I'm destined to make a neder should be batal, as long as you remember the t'nai at the time you made the neder. Meaning, you'll only be able to be mavatel the nedarim if you remember the t'nai at the time of the neder. So the Gemara asks, what? You'll only be able to be mavatel the nedarim if at the time you made the neder you remembered the stipulation, only then the stipulation is chal? Just the opposite. If you remember the stipulation and you make the neder, that means you want to make the neder anyway, even though there's a stipulation. Right? You want to make the neder anyway, even though there's a stipulation. The Ran, in an unauthorized Ran, asked the following question. This is mamish the opposite of what the Gemara assumed originally. The Gemara assumed originally that in the Mishnah, the way the guy is making his neder meaningless is he makes the t'nai, and then he makes the neder, and as long as he remembers the neder, as long as he remembers the stipulation, the neder won't be chal. So there we say the neder is not chal if you remember the stipulation. Now we're saying if you remember the stipulation, then the neder is chal. Why? The original supposition of the Gemara is, if at the time you made the neder, you remember the stipulation will uproot the neder. And now we're saying just the opposite. If you remember the stipulation when you made the neder, you want the neder to be chal. So the Ran says, on the 7th line, he says, "V'loy dami lamai da'amrina le'el loy shamalei v'loy asi bahadei da'ama ein t'nai bato shekshu noider al das rishayna hu oisa." The Ran says something very simple. There, you're making the neder at the time you made the stipulation. So, what you're doing is, I'm making a stipulation, I don't want it to be chal. So, as long as you remember you don't want it to be chal, when you make the neder, you have no intention to make the neder. Because you're doing it at the same time. So then, remembering the t'nai is gufa, the context of how you're making the neder. You're making the neder through the t'nai that you don't want it to be chal. But now you're making the neder days later, much later. So if you forgot about the t'nai, then the t'nai is effective. If you remember the t'nai, that means you want to be mavatel the t'nai. Because if you wanted the t'nai to work, then you wouldn't have said anything. Meaning, if you're not oiker the Tanai and you want the Tanai to work, the Ran says, Lama hu naider. Okay, look at the top line of the Ran. Hachi katani aroitza sheyoichal chaver etzlei nidrei zerzin hein. It's nidrei zerzin. Va'afilo ina oichal imai. Even if he doesn't eat with you, loichal nidra, the neder is nachal. Shalei niskavin ela lezruze. He's only mechavein to encourage him. V'hainu diktani af. Now we understand why it says af. Not only is it nidrei zerzin in the first case, in the first mishnayos, by the buyer and the seller, this is also nidrei zerzin. V'haroitza shelo yiskaimu nedarav kolaymar hashta tani dina achrina. Now it's telling me another din. The haroitza shelo yiskaimu nedarav, someone who wants that his nedarim should not stand, yamod b'Rosh Hashanah, he should stand up in Rosh Hashanah, v'yoymar, that all the nedarim that I make are batal. And that stipulation is only effective if you don't remember it when you make the neder. Izachar b'shas haneder akrei l'tanai, you're being oiker the tanai v'kaim l'nidrei shem loichein lama hu noider achshav. Because if you remember the tanai, why are you making the neder now? Don't say anything. Now here's the thing, right? The Gemara is asking, why would the Mishnah say that if you want to uproot the nedarim, it's provided that you remember the tanai at the time of the neder? Well, if you remember the Tanai, then that means you want to override it. So Rava has to change the Abaye has to change the gersa. Amar Abaye, Tani uvavad shelo yehi zachar b'shas haneder. As long as you don't remember the Tanai when you made the neder. At the time you made the neder, you forgot about the Tanai. So therefore, if you would have remembered the Tanai, you want the neder to be chal. If you don't remember the Tanai, so the Tanai is able to be oiker the neder. That's what Abaye says. Tani uvilvad shelo yehi zachar b'shas haneder. As long as you don't remember it. Now, that is the first answer. We're changing the girsa of the Mishnah to read, as long as you don't remember the Tanai. We're going to have to see, that's what basically Kol Nidrei is. Kol Nidrei, how does Kol Nidrei work? You're Mavatel all future, not Nedarim you made in the past, not Nedarim that you made in the past. There's nothing you could do about Nedarim in the past. Kol Nidrei is not about the past, it's about the future. You're saying now, Hareini Moiser Moida, that any Nedarim I make in the future is null and void. But you can't make Nedar, you can't be Mater Nedarim of the past. How are you supposed to do that? And basically what that does is, so now, any Nedarim you make in the future, forgetting about your Kol Nidrei, won't be Chal. Rava Amar La'olam Kedamin Meikar. Rava says, let's keep the original Gersa. It's talking about as long as you remember the Tanai. If you remember the Tanai, then the neder is not Chal. We asked if you remember the Tanai, you want to be Mavatel the Tanai. So we're going to see. Rava agrees that if you don't remember the Tanai whatsoever, the Tanai will be Mavatel the neder. Rava is talking about, in order to preserve the Gersa, a very limited case. You know what it means as long as you remember? You made a Tanai in Rosh Hashanah. You don't remember what kind of Tanai you made. You know you asered food. You made a Tanai to aser food. But you didn't realize you were asering, you weren't sure, did I aser vegetables, did I aser fruits, did I aser meat? You made a Tanai, and you made a Tanai Rosh Hashanah, and you don't remember what it was. V'hashta kanadar, now you made a neder. Izachar b'shas haneder, if he remembers at the time of the neder. V'amar, and he says, Al das harishona ani noider, I'm making the neder with my original intent in mind, meaning I want to preserve the Tanai. In other words, if you don't remember at all that you made a Tanai, the Tanai will be Mavatal, the Neder. But what if I do know I made a Tanai, I don't know what it was. And you say, I remember the Tanai, and I'm making the Neder al das harishayna. So then Nidrei les b'mamasha. But if you didn't say al das harishayna, where he remembers the Tanai, but he doesn't say that I'm doing it with that in mind, Akrei l'Tanai, he's being Akrei l'Tanai v'kayim l'Nidrei. So basically Rava is adding there two ways to be Akrei the Neder. Either if he doesn't remember the Tanai at all, or if he remembers the Tanai, he just doesn't remember what the Tanai was, and he says, Al das rishayna ani noider. Let's see the holy Ran. The Ran is the first wide line in the Ran. Rava Amar Kagon Shehisna B'Rosh Hashanah V'Layada Mimah Hisna. Rava Lo Yasal Afluga Elei Dabai. Rav is not arguing with Rabbi. The Moidahu, he's Moidah the Chol She'ino Zercha Tanai Klal. If you don't remember the Tanai at all, B'Shas Nidroi HaNeder Batal, the Neder's Batal. Ela Dulei Nichalei L'Shabushe L'Shnemas Nisan. He doesn't want to corrupt the text of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says as long as you remember. The Mishnah says as long as you remember. If you remember the Tanai, then the Neder should be Chal. This is what it means to say. If you want to be Mavatal the Neder, Yamoid b'Rosh Hashanah v'Yomer. You should stand up in Rosh Hashanah and you should say, there are two dinim. If you don't remember the Tanai at all when you made the Neder, you're oblivious to the Tanai, Harei Neder Batal. But what if you remember it a little bit? Let's say at the time you made the Neder, I remember I made a Tanai. I'm making a Neder now to aser bread. I remember I made a Tanai. Was it to aser bread or was it to aser jelly beans? If he remembers the Tanai a little bit, let's say he made a Tanai in Rosh Hashanah. He doesn't know what the Tanai was. He made a Tanai on something specific. Doesn't remember if it was bread. He remembers he made such a Tanai. So then if you remember you made the Tanai, if he says, okay, I'm making this Neder, but with it, the original Tanai should apply, meaning to say, if my Tanai was on this, then I want to be Mavatal the Neder. Sheyivatal gam achshav. Ani roitze sheyibatal. And then he remembers, V'nizkar achakav shal davar zeh shenadar achshav hisna betchila. Levato Nidrei. So then the Neder is not Chal. So when it says as long as you remember the Neder, what does that mean as long as you remember the Neder? That the Tanai only works when he remembers that he made some Neder at the time of, some Tanai at the time of Neder. But if, Loi Amar al das Rishayna ani yoisa, let's say he remembers he made a Tanai, but he doesn't know what it was, and he doesn't say, I'm making this Neder being governed by that Tanai, Batlei l'Tanai, the Tanai is Batal, the Kaimei l'Nedrei, and the Neder stands, the Kivan Shal Yozoicher b'Shas HaNeder, since he remembers at the time of the Neder, Shehisna, that he made a Tanai, V'lo yadu imai hisna, and he doesn't know what it was, and Daito hayu she'iskayim Tanai, if he wanted the Tanai to stand, then he shouldn't have made the Neder, without specifying, so that the Tanai doesn't uproot the Neder. Must be he wants the Neder to stand. So what does the Mishnah mean as long as he remembers? Umasnisin diktani uvavad she'izachar hachikatani uvavad she'yehei hatnai zachor bepiv, as long as he says it with his mouth at the time of the Neder. Zachar means to say. Zachar means to say. You know what it means? Either like this. If he totally forgot about the Tanai will be Mavatal the Neder. But if he remembers the Tanai, then the Tanai will only uproot the Neder if he says, Zachor, if he says that I'm making the Neder with the Tanai in mind. Now, you want to know, what does it have to do with Pesach? I thought you would ask that question. Because, there's a big question. Reb Chaim Brisker asks, there's a mitzvah every night of the year of Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. What's the difference between Zechira and Sipur? Famous kasha. There's a Pri Megadim that I never said over before. Pri Megadim says the difference between Zechira and Sipur is Zechira, you could do it behirhor. And Sipur, you have to say it. And the Shagas Aryeh says, no. Zachar! Zachar is bepeh. Zachar is always bepeh. That's what the Ran is saying. That's what the Mishnah says. Uvavad sheyehe Zachar! As long as you remember. What is it? That doesn't mean remember, it means to say. If you remember it, if you don't remember the Tanai at all, the Tanai will be Mavatel the Neder. Because don't say, well, I said the Neder, regardless of the Tanai, you forgot about the Tanai. So since you forgot about the Tanai will work. But if you remember the Tanai a little bit, then the Tanai will only be Mavatel the Neder if you say, I want the Neder to be made in the context of the original Tanai. Lahalacha, the Ran says, we hold like Rava. We know we put Machlek is and Rava, you hold like Rava. Therefore, if you made a Tanai, you said in the beginning of the year, all my Nedarim are Nachal, and you forgot the Tanai, the Neder is Batal. But if you made a Neder on a specific thing, and at the time of the Neder you remembered it, but you don't know what it was, so then the Tanai will not be the Tanai will be Batal, and the Neder will be Chal, unless you say you want it to be in the context of that Tanai. Because since you remembered a little bit, you should have said Al Das Rishayna. Says the Ran, 4 lines, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 lines from the bottom. This is an unauthorized Ran. Venira, Shema Shoimrim Ktsas Kehilas B'Yom Kippur, Kol Nidrei Ve'esarei. Why do we make Kol Nidrei on Yom Kippur night? Mike, the Sfardim say Kol Nidrei? Yeah. Why do some kilos say Kol Nidrei? L'davar zehim eschavnim. That's what they're trying to do. What are they trying to accomplish? They're trying to say any Nedarim I make in the upcoming year are not Chal. Levatel Nedarim she'yidru l'achar mikan. But the question is, most people don't think they're Mevatel future Nedarim. Din daharna udishtabana udacharimna. They're saying past Nedarim. Ella Shalashonim Meshubash. Their language is corruption. You can only be Mevatel future Nedarim. So the Rabbeinu Yaakov fixed the lashon. Rabbeinu Yaakov changed Kol Nidrei Kedei Shemish Ma'usay Lahaba, that it should mean the future. Loimer Kol Nidrei V'Asar Di Asarna V'Di Charamna, with the kamatz in the past. I'm sorry, the asarna in the future. However, you shouldn't say that, because we're going to see in our Mishnah says that we're going to see in the Gemara that we don't like to tell people about this because it's going to cause them to be mekel and nedarim. And also, maybe it only works for Nedarim, not Shvuos. Okay, let's see a little bit further in the Gemara. Rav Huna bar Chinna savar l'midrashei beperka. Rav Huna bar Chinna wanted to teach this trick that people in the beginning of the year should get up and say, any Nedarim that I make in the future should be batal. Now, if you read our Mishnah, the Mishnah hides this trick because it sort of fuses it together with Nidrei Zeruzin, and you wouldn't know it's a separate trick. It's like if you want to pressure your friend to eat by you, but you don't want to make a real neder, so say, I'm making a Tanai, and then tell your friend, okay, I'm making a neder that you have to eat by me. But the Mishnah is not saying a trick in general how to get rid of all future Nedarim. It's just the way we're forced to read the Mishnah in two parts is the first part is if you want to pressure your friend to eat by you, make a Nidrei Zerizin. And then in general, if you want to abolish all your Nedarim throughout the year, make this statement that all your Nedarim are batal. So the Mishnah is hiding Kol Nidrei. So Rav Huna Bar Chanina wanted to teach everyone about Kol Nidrei. Amar le Rav, Rav said, Tana kamastim le stume. The Tana hid Kol Nidrei. Kedei shelo yinagu kalas rosh b'nedarim. So that people don't treat Nedarim lightly. Va'at darash shalei b'perka. And you're trying to give a shir about Kol Nidrei. Don't tell people about Kol Nidrei. So we'll have to see, but we do Kol Nidrei b'zman hazeh. So the Tosfos asks 4 lines from the bottom in Tosfos, "Tamer lefimad de precious el de Kol Nidrei de bito nadarimu hechamin v'chai gavna b'knufia b'vnei kol." How can we say Kol Nidrei publicly? And especially we hire a chazan for a lot of money. He wears this big funny yarmulke. Everyone's looking at him. There are people, they come to shul once a year for Kol Nidrei. Here, the one halacha you have to hide is Kol Nidrei. Oh, you see how it is? The one halacha that nobody's allowed to know about, that is the most attended ceremony in Judaism. Isn't that ironic? The one halacha that you're not allowed to teach people about is the most attended ceremony we have. So Tosfos says, we're just trying to hide it from Amei Haaretz at the Shiur. And we're going to explain to them what it is, they're going to be mezalzel b'nedarim. But the way we say Kol Nidrei, nobody has any idea what it is. So it's okay. By the way, I would say, that's why we make it such a solemn event. You know, the people who come once a year, they think we're saying some like spiritual, a transformative, elevated prayer to the Almighty, and really all we're doing is this is like a technical, legal statement. So we take out the Sifrei Torah and we put on these stern faces to trick everyone into thinking that this is some solemn, prayer communion. All it is basically, okay, if you're gonna make any promises this year, everything is null and void. So they think this is some holy thing, and it turns out it's really just some legal procedure. Take out the Sifrei Torah with the everyone's very solemn. So basically, Tosfos says the reason we can say Kol Nidrei is nobody has any idea what it means. But to explain it to people, you can't explain it to people. Last line, Yiboiluhu pligi Rabban Alei Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Oilai. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov was the one who made this statement that Nidrei Zeruzin, you could just basically tell your friend you're making a neder, and then it's not chal. Well, is this his personal opinion, or do people agree with him? If the Rabbanan argue, do we paskin like him or not? Says the Ran, the question here is, maybe the rabbis only said nidrei zerizin by a seller and a buyer. Shein PM v'libam shavim. Because they don't mean what they said. There we would apply nidrei zerizin because originally they wanted only 3. But so if you want your friend to eat by you, you could say there you mean it. Okay, Rabbi Isai, here you have it. Chav Gimel and Beis. Next week, Chav Dalid, and then the week of Pesach, Chabalino Toiva, Daf Chav Hey. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. For the record,
Recording stopped.
For the record, we do say Kol Nidrei, but it's a much more happier tone than what you.
Yeah? No, we're very not happy when we say it.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.